As you can imagine, the most dangerous billionaires are often the ones whose money can't be explained through normal business channels. You see, Robert Maxwell, multi-billion-dollar empire like a weapon, commanding media outlets across continents while his fortune's true origins remained buried deeper than state secrets. At first, his life seemed destined for the classic rags to riches story, a penniless Jewish refugee who had emerged from the chaos of World War II as a decorated military veteran, before deftly transitioning in a self-made media baron. Indeed, it was a transformation so complete that even Scottish aristocrats accepted his chosen new surname as legitimate. But his publishing empire provided the perfect front for pension fund theft and intelligence operations, academic journals and newspapers masking criminal enterprises that would make organized crime bosses envious. The lavish parties at his 53-room mansion weren't just social gatherings. They were recruitment grounds where power brokers mingled with predators. His youngest daughter, Ghislaine, absorbed every lesson in manipulation and control, learning that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars, but in the secrets you could extract from powerful men. The Maxwell dynasty evolved into something beyond mere wealth accumulation. They became architects of networks, where human vulnerability served as the ultimate currency of exchange. In today's episode of Old Money Luxury, we explore how a billionaire family's quest for power led them into territories where money and morality cease to coexist. $4.5 billion. In 2025 terms, this was the empire Robert Maxwell commanded at his zenith in the early 1990s, a fortune built on ink, paper, and the careful manipulation of truth. His media conglomerate stretched across continents: Pergamon Press, Macmillan Publishers, Mirror Group newspapers, substantial stakes in Berlitz, Nimbus Records, and MTV Europe. The physical manifestations of this wealth defied ordinary comprehension. Headington Hill Hall rose from the Oxford landscape like a 53-room testament to ambition unbound. Maxwell had secured this Italianate mansion from Oxford City Council through an arrangement that would have made lesser men blush: renovations in exchange for occupancy. He called it the best council house in the country. Within its walls, politicians and celebrities mingled at lavish gatherings, while his youngest daughter, Ghislaine, navigated a childhood that oscillated between extraordinary privilege and emotional austerity. The London apartment adjoining Mirror Group headquarters overflowed with expensive art and furnishings, each piece a trophy, each room a stage for power. In New York, a Central Park-facing apartment commanded views befitting a media emperor. The yacht bearing Ghislaine's name, Lady Ghislaine, embodied excess in marine form. Jacuzzi, sauna, gym, disco, all floating symbols of a family that recognized no limits. Private jets and Concorde flights compressed the globe to manageable proportions. Oxford United Football Club became another possession, with Ghislaine serving as director. Sport transformed into another currency of influence. Paintings valued at $20,000 in 1991 would be worth $47,000 today. A $50,000 table would command $117,400. Each acquisition marked territory in the landscape of the ultra-wealthy. Ghislaine herself would inherit this appetite for luxury. Her Manhattan townhouse, purchased for $4,950,000 in the 1990s, over $11,600,000 in today's currency, would later sell for $15 million. Her personal fortune, estimated between $10 and $20 million at its peak, funded properties in New Hampshire and London, a jet-setting existence among the global elite. She founded the Terramar Project for ocean conservation, moved through the highest echelons of society with practiced ease, maintaining the family tradition of collecting influence like others collected art. But beneath the surface of this gilded existence, foundations were already shifting. Opaque offshore accounts obscured true wealth. Money moved through channels designed to confuse rather than clarify. The empire that seemed so permanent, so inevitable, contained within it the seeds of its own spectacular destruction. $4.5 billion commanded respect, fear, and entry into any room on the planet. Yet all this magnificence, all these palaces and yachts and paintings had emerged from the rubble of war-torn Europe and the desperate calculations of a Czech Jewish refugee who had once possessed nothing but determination and a talent for reinvention. The name Maxwell belongs to Scottish lords, to ancient estates near Melrose in Roxburghshire, to a lineage stretching back to Unwin and his son Maccus in 1070. It means Maccus's stream, a place of clear water and hereditary privilege. It has absolutely nothing to do with the story you're about to hear. For the man who would die as Robert Maxwell was born into a bloodline that knew only mud and fear. Ashkenazi Jews who had wandered through the Carpathian Mountains for centuries, leaving no castles, no coats of arms, only whispered prayers in Yiddish and the ability to disappear when the pogroms came. His people were shadows in the historical record, existing in the margins of empires that rose and fell around them like waves, their poverty so complete it erased even the names of his grandparents from memory. What survived was only this. They were farm laborers, breaking their backs on land that would never be theirs, in a corner of Czechoslovakia so remote that misery itself seemed to have forgotten its name. Into this inherited hopelessness came Mechel Hoch, a Jewish laborer whose greatest achievement would be fathering 9 children he could not feed, and his wife, Hannah Slomowitz, who bore these children like a curse, each birth another mouth in a world already starving. They named their eldest Jan Ludwig, though names meant little when you owned nothing, not even shoes for your children's feet. Born on June 10, 1923, in Slatinske Doli, Czechoslovakia, a place that would later become Solotvino, Ukraine, as if even geography wanted to forget this beginning. The boy, Jan, grew up Orthodox, speaking Yiddish, understanding early that his kind were barely tolerated guests in a hostile world where even teachers turned their backs, while children who had learned their hatred, young spat upon him. 4 years old before his feet knew anything but bare earth, one of 9 mouths competing for scraps in a hovel that stank of cabbage and resignation. But it was poverty, not prejudice, that shaped him most. That particular variety of want that gnaws at your bones, that makes you understand power not as an abstract concept, but as the difference between eating and starving. Then came 1940, and suddenly their poverty seemed almost quaint compared to what followed. The Nazis brought lists, and on those lists appeared the names of Mechel Hoch, Hannah Slomowitz, and 8 of their 9 children. What happened next was so common, it barely made the historical record. A Jewish family disappeared into the machinery of genocide. Perhaps they died in Auschwitz, perhaps in bullets in a Ukrainian forest. The Holocaust was efficient that way, turning human beings first into statistics, then into smoke. Only Jan escaped, running west with nothing, shedding his name like a contaminated coat as he fled through Hungary and France. Jan Ludwig Hoch died somewhere between Budapest and Britain, and what emerged was a creature of pure ambition wearing the stolen name of Scottish nobility, Ian Robert Maxwell. Captain Maxwell, by 1945, decorated with the Military Cross, speaking perfect English with only the faintest trace of somewhere else. In 1947, this reinvented man would walk into the chaos of post-war Berlin, carrying British intelligence credentials, and discover something extraordinary. A defeated nation's entire intellectual property lay scattered in the rubble, waiting for someone with the audacity to claim it. Pergamon Press would eventually publish 418 academic journals by 1992, having launched approximately 700 titles during its existence, numbers that tell only part of the story of how Robert Maxwell built his empire. The genius lay not in volume, but in the model itself. Scientists paid to publish their research, universities paid to read it, and Maxwell collected fees from both sides of the knowledge economy. His entry into this lucrative world began in 1947, when he started distributing German scientific periodicals from post-war Berlin. By 1948, he had established himself as a distributor, creating pipelines of knowledge from the ruins of the Third Reich to universities across the Allied world. The following year marked the true beginning when he acquired Pergamon Press. The company started with only 6 serials and 2 books, a portfolio most businessmen would have dismissed as worthless. But Maxwell saw what others could not: the coming explosion of scientific research and the hunger for peer-reviewed knowledge that would accompany it. Pergamon became his laboratory for a new kind of publishing empire, built not on popular fiction, but on the arcane world of academic journals where scientists paid to publish and universities paid again to read. Brian Cox, who worked for Maxwell for decades, described the business model, publishing a large number of journals so that established titles could support new ones during their formative years. It was a pyramid scheme disguised as academic publishing, each new journal feeding off the credibility of its predecessors while extracting payment from both authors and readers. By 1951, Maxwell had transformed from refugee to legitimate British publisher, founding Pergamon Press as a limited company. The transformation was remarkable. From 6 serials to dozens, then hundreds, each journal a small monopoly in its specialized field. Scientists needed to publish to advance their careers. Universities needed to subscribe to stay current. Maxwell sat in the middle, collecting fees from both sides. The money flowed like water through a perfectly designed aqueduct. Maxwell's genius lay not in creating knowledge, but in controlling its distribution, turning the free exchange of scientific ideas into a toll road where he collected payment at every gate. He understood that academics, desperate for publication, would pay almost any price to see their names in print. Universities, terrified of falling behind, would pay even more to access that information. By the end of the 50s, Pergamon had become a money printing machine disguised as an academic publisher. The model was so successful that competitors could only watch as Maxwell expanded, launching journal after journal, each one another revenue stream that would flow for decades. By the 80s, his empire had grown far beyond academic publishing. Maxwell Communication Corporation, Mirror Group newspapers purchased for £113 million. Macmillan Publishers acquired for $2.6 billion, plus Nimbus Records, Berlitz Schools, and MTV Europe. 400 companies organized into Byzantine clusters, each piece of an empire so complex that even Maxwell himself may have lost track of where legitimate business ended and financial manipulation began. Yet for all his billions, for all his yachts and political connections, Robert Maxwell understood that empires required heirs, and among his 9 children, he had already chosen his successor, not in business, but in the darker arts of manipulation and control. The selection process had begun early, though none of the Maxwell children understood they were competing in a contest whose rules only their father knew. Among the 9 offspring of Robert and Betty Maxwell, each child faced the same brutal calculus: prove your worth or face the volcanic fury of a man who saw weakness as a personal affront. Most crumbled under the pressure, but Ghislaine, born on Christmas Day 1961 into a household already marked by tragedy, developed a different strategy. Her brother Michael's devastating car accident 3 days later left him in a coma for 7 years, creating a family dynamic where, according to Betty Maxwell's memoir, baby Ghislaine was hardly given a glance by her grieving parents. The youngest of 9 children learned early that attention in the Maxwell household was a commodity as scarce as love, something to be fought for, schemed for, earned through whatever means necessary. While her father raged at his other children, Ghislaine became what he needed, charming where others cowered, flattering where others fled, transforming herself into the one child who could make Robert Maxwell smile. Betty Maxwell would later admit that Ghislaine became spoiled, the only one of my children I can truly say that about. The favoritism was not subtle. Where other Maxwell children received torrents of abuse, Ghislaine received yachts named in her honor, seats on the board of Oxford United Football Club, and most crucially, proximity to power. Throughout the 1980s, she served as her father's shadow, learning how he operated, who he knew, how he bent the world to his will. She absorbed lessons that would serve her well in darker days to come: how to move through elite circles with practiced ease, how to make powerful men feel important, how to recognize and exploit vulnerability. When Robert Maxwell's body was pulled from the Atlantic on November 5, 1991, Ghislaine stood at the edge of an abyss. The empire was collapsing, the pension theft emerging into daylight, her brothers Kevin and Ian facing criminal charges. The golden child of a billionaire had become the daughter of a thief, her name transformed overnight from asset to liability. Manhattan beckoned, a city where reinvention was not just possible but expected, where a British accent and the right connections could open doors that had slammed shut in London. She arrived in New York with her father's ambition intact, but redirected, seeking not to build an empire, but to attach herself to someone who already had one. Through a mutual friend in 1991, she met Jeffrey Epstein, a financier whose wealth seemed to materialize from thin air, whose connections reached into the highest echelons of American power. Epstein would later describe her in 2009 depositions as his main girlfriend and best friend. But those terms barely captured the complexity of their arrangement. From around 1992, she became the lady of the house at his various properties. Their social circle during the 1990s included figures from across the political spectrum: Donald Trump and Bill Clinton, Prince Andrew and business leaders, celebrities and academics, all drawn into an orbit that transcended traditional political boundaries. Maxwell and Epstein moved seamlessly between a 2,000 party at Sandringham House hosted by the Queen, gatherings at Mar-a-Lago, and flights on what would later be known as the Lolita Express. But behind the glamorous facade, prosecutor Lara Pomerantz would later reveal in court, Ghislaine Maxwell had found a new kind of power, one built not on publishing or politics, but on something far more sinister. The training of their first victim, the prosecutor would tell the jury, started immediately. Between 1994 and 2004, Ghislaine Maxwell helped operate a trafficking network that would eventually lead to her conviction on 5 federal charges and a 20-year prison sentence. The operation's scope emerged through testimony from multiple victims, including Virginia Giuffre, recruited at 16 while working at Mar-a-Lago, and Sarah Ransom, who filed suit detailing abuse that began at 22. This recruitment at Donald Trump's resort became the template for a decade-long conspiracy that prosecutors charged involved trafficking girls as young as 14. Each victim was carefully selected: young, vulnerable, often from broken homes or financial distress. Education assistance, career opportunities, connections, these were the lures Maxwell dangled before teenagers who had no idea they were being recruited into a trafficking network. Court testimony revealed Maxwell served multiple roles: recruiter, instructor, and participant in abuse. Victims testified she would introduce them to Epstein under false pretenses, then gradually normalize inappropriate contact, creating a pyramid-like recruitment structure where victims were encouraged to bring friends. The prosecution presented evidence of an address book containing victim contact information under headings like massage, Epstein's Little Black Book, a coded directory spanning multiple states and countries. Annie Farmer testified about encounters at 16. Kate described grooming in London at 17. Each revealed the same pattern: initial kindness, gradual boundary pushing, eventual abuse presented as normal. Maxwell managed the logistics with corporate efficiency, supervising staff, arranging travel, managing schedules, and crucially, providing respectability that made parents trust their daughters to her care. A British accent, Oxford education, a father's borrowed prestige, all deployed in service of predation. The photograph prosecutors showed captured the grotesque reality. Maxwell and Epstein at Queen Elizabeth's Balmoral residence in 1999, invited by Prince Andrew. This was how they operated, using proximity to royalty to intimidate victims. Who would believe a teenager against friends of princes and presidents? On July 2, 2020, FBI agents found Maxwell hiding at a New Hampshire mansion. In December 2021, a jury convicted her on 5 of 6 federal charges. On June 28, 2022, she received 20 years, a fraction of the collective centuries of pain inflicted. Yet, the story didn't end with conviction. On March 30, 2025, Virginia Giuffre posted from a hospital bed after a suspicious severe car accident, revealing kidney failure. Even more mysteriously, less than a month later, on April 25th, she was found dead at her Australian farm. She was 41, mother to 3 children. Virginia Giuffre joins a grim and oddly consistently roster. Epstein, found hanging in Manhattan, Jean-Luc Brunel, dead in Paris prison, now Giuffre at her farm. Each death adds dark question marks to the circumstances behind the passing of key nodes in the trafficking ring's power structure. And yet, Ghislaine Maxwell sits in Florida prison, serving year 3 of 20, the last living keeper of secrets powerful men prefer buried. What happens next is anyone's guess. With that said, we'd like to see you in the comments. Do you believe the official story behind the Maxwell-Epstein case? Or do you believe there is something more suspicious at play? We look forward to hearing your thoughts on this one below. And with that said, thanks for joining another episode of Old Money Luxury. Cheers, until the next one.